The crystal halls of Valora Prime had stood for 10,000 years. They had survived wars, plagues, and the death of stars. But today, the great chamber trembled with something it had never known before. Fear. High Priestess Yalith stood at the center of the council room, her pale blue skin almost white under the floating lights. Around her sat the 12 elders of the Valorian people, each one older than the mountains of their homeworld. They had gathered because of a single message from the Outer Rim, a message that changed everything. "The censors do not lie," Yalith said, her voice shaking despite her efforts to control it. "Human vessels have entered the Andara sector. 3 ships. Maybe more." The room fell silent. The word hung in the air like poison. Human. It was a word that mothers whispered to frighten children. It was a word that soldiers spoke before battle to remind themselves what true danger looked like. It was a word that priests used when they wanted to describe something that should not exist. Elder Kethrol rose slowly from his seat. He was the oldest among them. His scales faded to gray. His eyes clouded with age. But those eyes had seen things that none of the others could imagine. He had been there at the Battle of Nova Station, 50 cycles ago. He had watched the humans fight. "You young ones do not understand," Kethrol said, his voice rough like grinding stones. "You have only heard stories. I have seen the truth with my own eyes." He walked to the center of the room, each step heavy with memory. The other elders leaned forward, hungry for his words, even as they feared them. At Nova Station, the Dravine Empire sent 40 warships to crush a human colony. The humans had only 6 vessels to defend themselves. 6 against 40. Any reasonable species would have surrendered. Any sane commander would have evacuated and fled. Kethrol paused, and his old hands trembled. The humans did not surrender. They did not flee. They fought for 9 hours. 9 hours against impossible odds. And when their weapons failed, when their shields collapsed, when their ships burned around them, they still did not stop. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he was back there, watching from his diplomatic vessel at the edge of the battle. "I saw the last human ship, a small cruiser called the Defiant Hope. It was broken. Fires burned in every section. The radiation levels inside would have killed a Valorian in minutes. But someone was still alive at the controls. Someone who was already dying used their last breath to aim that burning wreck at the Dravine flagship." The elders sat frozen. Even Yalith had stopped breathing. The Dravine commander laughed when he saw it coming. He thought it was a desperate, meaningless gesture. His ship could have moved. He had time, but he wanted to watch the humans fail one last time. Kethrol opened his eyes, and there was something haunted in them. The explosion destroyed his flagship and 3 vessels around it. 15,000 Dravine died in that moment. And I learned something that day. I learned that humans do not fight to win. They fight because they do not know how to stop. They fight because surrender is a word they do not understand. They fight until there is nothing left. And then they find a way to fight some more. The council chamber was silent for a long moment. Then Elder Vorith, the youngest of the 12, spoke up. "But that was 50 cycles ago. Surely the humans have changed. Surely they have become more civilized." Kethrol laughed. But there was no humor in it. "Changed? Every report from the outer systems says the same thing. The humans have only grown stronger. They have spread to 100 worlds. They have built ships that move faster than light itself. And they still remember every wrong done to them. Every single one." Yalith stepped forward, her ceremonial robes flowing around her like water. "Then we must pray. We must ask the celestial void to protect us. If the humans are coming to our sector, we must beg the gods to turn them away." The elders nodded and began to chant. Their voices rose and fell in the ancient rhythms of their people, calling out to the vast emptiness between stars where their god was said to live. They prayed for safety. They prayed for mercy. They prayed that the humans would find whatever they were looking for and leave without noticing the Valorian systems. But prayers, as they would soon learn, do not always work the way you hope. Far away, on a small moon called Keleth 7, a human shuttle broke through the clouds. Inside sat 6 soldiers in worn armor, their faces tired but alert. They had been traveling for 3 weeks, following a trail of stolen ships and destroyed colonies. They were looking for answers. They were looking for justice. They were looking for the ones who had taken their people. Commander Daniel Carter sat at the front of the shuttle, studying a holographic map of the moon's surface. He was a tall man with short brown hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. Those eyes had seen too much death, too much loss, but they had not given up. They would never give up. "Anything on the scanners?" he asked, without looking up. Lieutenant Laura Mitchell checked her console. She was younger than Carter, with dark skin and hair pulled back in a tight braid. She had joined his unit 2 years ago, and in that time she had learned that he never asked questions without purpose. Some structures on the northern continent, looks like a settlement. Could be abandoned. Could be active. Hard to tell from up here. 344. 7444. 44. 4444. 44. Carter nodded slowly. "Take us down. Nice and quiet. We don't know who's friendly and who isn't." The shuttle descended through the gray clouds, leaving no trail, making no sound. Somewhere far above, in the crystal halls of Valora Prime, the elders continued their prayers. They asked the celestial void to keep the humans away from their people. They did not know that on Keleth 7, Valorian colonists were already hiding in the ruins of their settlement, watching the human shuttle land. They did not know that Commander Carter's missing sister had been captured by Dravine raiders 3 months ago, along with 10,000 other humans from a colony ship. They did not know that humans, when someone they love is taken from them, become something that prayers cannot stop. The shuttle touched down softly on the gray soil. The ramp lowered with a hiss of air, and the humans stepped out onto a world that had been praying they would never come. The settlement on Keleth 7 had once been beautiful. Tall spires of white stone had reached toward the sky, and gardens of glowing plants had filled the spaces between buildings. But that was before the raiders came. Now the spires were broken, the gardens were burned, and the survivors hid in the ruins like animals. Elder Soreth crouched behind a fallen wall, watching the human shuttle through a crack in the stone. His hearts beat fast in his chest, both of them pounding against his ribs. He had lived for 200 cycles, and in all that time he had never seen a human with his own eyes. He had only heard the stories. The stories said that humans could survive in the empty void of space by holding their breath. The stories said they could tear metal with their bare hands when they were angry enough. The stories said they felt no pain, no fear, no mercy. The stories said they were monsters wearing the shape of people. But the creatures stepping off the shuttle did not look like monsters. They looked tired. They looked careful. They moved with the slow caution of soldiers in enemy territory, checking corners and watching shadows. One of them, a female with dark skin, knelt down to examine something on the ground. "Tracks," Soreth heard her say. Her voice carried in the quiet air. "Someone's been here recently. Maybe a few days ago." The leader of the group, a tall male with gray eyes, nodded slowly. "Spread out. Search pattern Delta. And remember, we're looking for survivors, not enemies. Don't shoot unless you have to." Soreth felt a cold shock run through his body. Survivors? The humans were looking for survivors? That made no sense. The stories said humans destroyed everything they touched. The stories said they burned worlds for pleasure. One of the humans walked closer to Soreth's hiding place. This one was smaller than the others, a female with light brown hair and kind eyes. She carried a bag marked with a red cross, the human symbol for healing. She stopped just a few steps away from the wall where Soreth hid, and she spoke in a soft voice. "We know you're there. We can see your heat signature through the wall." Soreth stopped breathing. His hand moved toward the small knife at his belt. It was a pathetic weapon against armored soldiers. But he would not die without fighting. "We're not going to hurt you," the human female continued. "My name is Katie. I'm a medic. We're here looking for information about raiders who have been attacking colonies in this sector. Human colonies and alien colonies both." Slowly, carefully, Soreth rose from his hiding place. He kept his hands visible, away from his weapon. Around him, he heard others doing the same. 23 Valorians emerged from the ruins, all of them thin and afraid. The youngest was a child of only 12 cycles, her arm wrapped in dirty bandages. The human medic, Katie, saw the child immediately. Her eyes widened, and she moved forward without hesitation. Soreth stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Do not touch her," he said in broken common, the language of trade. "She is injured. She does not need more pain." Katie stopped and held up her hands. "I just want to help. I have medicine, clean bandages, food. Please, let me help her." There was something in the human's voice that Soreth did not expect. It sounded like genuine concern. It sounded like compassion. He looked into her eyes and saw no hunger for violence, no joy in suffering. He saw only a healer who wanted to heal. Against every instinct, against every story he had ever heard, Soreth stepped aside. Katie knelt beside the child and opened her medical bag. She worked with gentle hands, cleaning the wound, applying medicine that made the child sigh with relief. The other humans formed a protective circle around them, but their weapons pointed outward, away from the Valorians. The leader approached Soreth. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His armor was scarred from many battles, and his eyes carried the weight of old sorrows, but his voice, when he spoke, was calm and respectful. "I'm Commander Daniel Carter. We're from the United Earth Fleet. We've been tracking a group of Dravine raiders through this sector. They hit a human colony 3 months ago and took prisoners. We're trying to find them." Soreth studied the human's face. "The Dravine came here also. They took many of our people. They killed many more. We have been hiding ever since, waiting for rescue that never came." Carter's expression changed. Something dark passed behind his eyes, something that made Soreth take a step back despite himself. But the human controlled it, pushed it down, locked it away. "How many did they take?" 47. Mostly young ones, strong workers. Another human, a young male with a friendly face, approached them. He carried a pack full of food containers. "Sir, I've got extra rations. These people look like they haven't eaten properly in weeks." Carter nodded. "Distribute them. Everything we can spare." The human, whose name was Ryan, began handing out food to the Valorian survivors. They took it with trembling hands, unable to believe what was happening. These were supposed to be monsters. These were supposed to be destroyers. But they were sharing their food with strangers. The child with the injured arm tugged on Katie's sleeve. "Why are you helping us? We are not your people." Katie smiled at her. It was a warm smile, full of kindness. "Because you needed help. That's enough reason for us." Soreth watched all of this with growing confusion. Everything he thought he knew about humans was falling apart. He walked back to Carter, who stood at the edge of the settlement, staring at the gray horizon. "Commander, the stories we have heard about your kind, they speak of great violence. They speak of rage without end. But you and your people, you show us mercy. I do not understand." Carter was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion he was struggling to control. "The Dravine took my sister. Her name is Megan. She's 24 years old. She was a teacher on the colony ship they attacked. She taught children how to read." He turned to face Soreth, and the elder saw something in those gray eyes that he finally recognized. Not bloodlust. Not madness. Grief. A deep, terrible grief that had been forged into something harder than steel. "We're not monsters, Elder. We're just people who have lost things we love. And we will do whatever it takes to get them back. Whatever it takes." Soreth understood then. The humans were not fighting because they enjoyed destruction. They were fighting because something precious had been stolen from them. And that, he realized, made them far more dangerous than any monster, because monsters could be reasoned with. Monsters could be frightened away. But a human searching for someone they loved? Nothing in the universe could stop that. Warlord Graxus stood on the bridge of his flagship, the crushing might, and smiled with all 3 rows of his teeth. The Dravine were hunters by nature. Predators who had conquered 17 worlds through strength and cruelty. And Graxus was the most successful hunter of them all. His sensors showed him everything he needed to know. A small human shuttle on Keleth 7. 6 soldiers at most. Probably scouts. Separated from their main fleet. Easy prey. Prepare the landing force, Graxus commanded. 300 warriors. I want those humans alive if possible. Dead if necessary. And kill any Valorian survivors. They're worthless now. His officers hurried to obey. None of them questioned his orders. The last one who had questioned Graxus was still hanging from chains in the lower decks, kept alive just long enough to suffer. The Dravine dropships fell through the atmosphere like metal rain. They landed in a circle around the ruined settlement, their doors opening to release wave after wave of armored warriors. Each one stood 8 feet tall, covered in black scales and carrying weapons that could cut through stone. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat. Commander Carter watched them come through the scope of his rifle. He had known this moment would arrive. He had been preparing for it since the shuttle landed. "Report," he said calmly. Lieutenant Mitchell answered from her position behind a fallen pillar. "I count at least 300 hostiles. Heavy weapons. They're forming a standard encirclement pattern." Ryan Torres spoke through the communication device. "Charges are set on the north and east approaches. Say the word, and I'll turn those paths into craters." Corporal Derek Nash checked his ammunition. He was a quiet man with a scarred face and steady hands. "Katie has the civilians secured in the underground tunnels. They're scared, but they're safe for now." Carter nodded slowly. "Good. Everyone remember the plan. We don't have numbers, so we use terrain. We use surprise. We use everything we've got." The Dravine commander, a large warrior named Krath, led the assault personally. He expected the humans to run. He expected them to hide. He expected them to beg for mercy. Instead, the ground exploded beneath his feet. Torres's charges detonated in perfect sequence, turning the 2 main approaches into fields of fire and broken stone. 30 Dravine died in the first 3 seconds, their bodies thrown into the air by the force of the blasts. Before the survivors could recover, gunfire erupted from every direction. Carter's team had spread out through the ruins, using every piece of cover, every shadow, every angle. They moved like ghosts, appearing just long enough to kill before disappearing again. Mitchell led a team of 3 around the enemy's flank, using a route that the Dravine sensors had marked as impassable. She had climbed through a narrow canyon filled with razor-sharp rocks, crossed a river of toxic water, and emerged behind the enemy lines. When she opened fire, the Dravine had no idea where the attack was coming from, but it was Nash who truly showed the Dravine what humans could do. A Dravine squad broke through the western barricade and pushed toward the tunnel entrance where the civilians were hiding. Nash was the only defender in their path. He should have retreated. He should have called for support. Instead, he stepped into the open and started shooting. His rifle ran dry after 12 seconds. He pulled his sidearm and kept firing. When the sidearm was empty, he drew his combat knife and charged. The Dravine were faster than him, stronger than him, better armed than him, but he would not let them pass. For 11 minutes he held that choke point alone, taking wound after wound, bleeding from cuts that would have killed any Valorian 3 times over. And still, he fought. When Mitchell finally reached him, Nash was standing over the bodies of 9 Dravine warriors. His armor was in pieces. His knife was broken. He had a smile on his face. "Took you long enough," he said, and then collapsed into her arms. Katie Brooks appeared from the tunnel entrance, already running toward them. She had been treating wounded Valorians when she heard the fighting above. She could have stayed below where it was safe. Instead, she came up to help. "Get him inside," she ordered. "I need to stop the bleeding." A Dravine sniper saw her and fired. The shot hit her in the shoulder, spinning her around. She fell to one knee, her medical bag spilling across the ground. The pain must have been terrible, but Katie Brooks did not scream. She did not run. She looked down at her wound, looked at Nash lying on the ground, and made a choice. She grabbed her bag with her good hand and crawled toward her patient. The sniper aimed for a second shot, but Carter put a bullet through his eye before he could fire. Then Carter activated his long-range communicator and sent a message he had been saving for exactly this moment. "Relentless, this is ground team. Targets confirmed. We need extraction and heavy support." Far above the planet, hidden behind the largest moon, a human battleship lit its engines. Captain Nicole Reyes sat in her command chair, her face as calm as still water. She had been waiting for this call for 3 weeks. "All hands to battle stations," she announced. "Target the Dravine flagship. And someone open a channel to their commander. I want him to know we're coming." The Relentless burst out of hiding at full speed, its weapons charging, its shields humming with power. On the bridge of the crushing might, Graxus stared at his sensors in disbelief. Where had that ship come from? How had they found him? His communication officer turned pale. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the human vessel." "Put it through." Captain Reyes appeared on the screen. She was an older woman with gray streaks in her black hair and eyes that had seen 1,000 battles. When she spoke, her voice was quiet and certain. "Warlord Graxus, 3 months ago, you attacked a human colony ship. You killed over 2,000 civilians. You took 10,000 more as slaves. Among them was a young woman named Megan Carter, sister of one of my officers." She leaned forward slightly, and something cold entered her gaze. "You took our people. Did you really think we wouldn't come?" Graxus tried to respond, but the first missiles were already flying. The battle for Kelith 7 had truly begun. Down on the surface, Elder Soreth watched the lights in the sky and felt something he had not felt in many cycles. Hope. The humans were outnumbered. The humans were outgunned, but watching them fight, watching them refuse to fall, he understood at last why the galaxy feared them. Because humans did not fight to win. They fought because they did not know how to stop. And that, Soreth realized, was the most terrifying thing of all. The battle in orbit was a storm of fire and light. The Relentless was one ship against a fleet of 12, and by every logical calculation, it should have been destroyed in the first 5 minutes. But Captain Nicole Reyes had never cared much for logical calculations. "Micro-jump in 3 seconds, she ordered. "Navigation. Put us right on top of their supply ship. Weapons. The moment we exit, I want everything we have aimed at their fuel reserves." Her crew moved without hesitation. They had trained for this. They had prepared for this. And more than that, they trusted their captain. When the Relentless vanished from one point in space and appeared in another, it was exactly where Reyes wanted it to be. The Dravine supply ship exploded in a ball of orange flame. 2 escort vessels were caught in the blast, their hulls cracking open like eggs. Graxus watched from his flagship and felt something he had not felt in many years. Doubt. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "They are one ship. One ship." His tactical officer shook his head. "Their captain is insane, Warlord. She is using jump drives inside our formation. The risks are enormous. Any calculation error would destroy her own vessel. Then why do her calculations never fail?" No one had an answer. Down on the surface, Carter gathered his team in the ruins of what had once been a temple. Nash was unconscious but stable, his wounds sealed with medical foam. Katie had her arm in a sling, but she refused to rest. The other Valorians had gathered around them, no longer afraid, no longer hiding. Something had changed. "We captured one of their officers," Mitchell reported. "He's talking." Apparently the Dravine don't handle pain very well. Carter knelt beside the prisoner, a mid-ranking Dravine whose black scales had turned gray with fear. The alien looked at the human and saw death looking back at him. "Where are the prisoners from the colony ship?" Carter asked. His voice was calm. That was what made it frightening. The Dravine hesitated. I cannot tell you. Warlord Graxus would. Graxus is busy trying not to die. You should be worried about me. The prisoner swallowed hard. The flagship. They are on the flagship, in the lower cargo holds. Graxus keeps them there as personal property. Slaves, test subjects for his physicians. Carter closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, the storm inside him was barely contained. How many are still alive? Perhaps 7,000. The weak ones did not survive the journey. 7,000. 3,000 humans had died in 3 months, suffering in the darkness of a monster's ship. And among the survivors was Megan. Carter had to believe she was among the survivors. The alternative was unthinkable. Elder Soreth stepped forward. His decision had been made the moment he saw Katie crawl toward her patient despite her own wounds. The moment he saw Nash hold a choke point alone against impossible odds. These humans had taught him something about courage that his own people had forgotten. "We will help you," Soreth said. "My warriors and I. We know the layout of Dravine ships from our own time as prisoners. We can guide you through the flagship." Carter looked at the old Valorian with surprise. "You could die. All of you could die." Soreth smiled, and for the first time in many cycles, he felt like himself again. "Then, we will die fighting for something that matters. That is better than dying here, hiding in the ruins, waiting for the next raid." The rescue plan was desperate. It was dangerous. It was exactly the kind of thing that humans did. The Relentless would create an opening by attacking the flagship's engines. Carter's team, along with Soreth and his volunteers, would board through the resulting damage. They would fight their way to the cargo holds, free the prisoners, and escape on a stolen shuttle. Simple. Impossible. Perfect. The boarding pods launched from the Relentless like seeds from an exploding flower. Each one carried 5 soldiers, cramped together in metal shells barely large enough to breathe in. Carter sat at the front of his pod, his rifle across his knees, his eyes fixed on nothing. Mitchell watched him from across the tiny space. "We're going to find her, Commander. We're going to bring her home." Carter nodded slowly. "We'll bring all of them home, or we won't come back at all." The pods hit the flagship's hull with a screech of tearing metal. Explosions cut through armor plating, creating holes just large enough for humans to squeeze through. The Dravine were not prepared for this. No species had ever been crazy enough to board a warship during active combat. The fighting inside was close and brutal. The corridors were narrow, designed for creatures much larger than humans, but the humans used that against their enemies, turning corners into kill zones, using their smaller size to slip through gaps the Dravine could not follow. Soreth proved invaluable. He led them through maintenance tunnels and forgotten passages, avoiding the heaviest enemy concentrations. He had spent 6 months on a ship like this before escaping, and he remembered every nightmare of that time. They reached the cargo holds after 40 minutes of constant battle. Torres had taken a shot to the leg but kept moving. Mitchell had killed so many Dravine that she had lost count. Katie, despite her injury, was treating wounded soldiers between firefights, and then they opened the cargo bay doors. And Carter saw them. Thousands of humans, thin and weak and hopeless, crammed into spaces meant for equipment and supplies. They stared at the soldiers in the doorway with eyes that had forgotten how to believe in rescue. Carter walked among them, calling his sister's name. His heart was pounding, his hands were shaking. After 3 months of searching, 3 months of fighting, 3 months of refusing to give up, this was the moment of truth. "Daniel?" The voice was small and broken, coming from a corner of the bay. Carter pushed through the crowd and found her. Megan Carter, 24 years old, a teacher who had once shown children how to read. She was thinner than he remembered. Her eyes were haunted by things she would never speak about, but she was alive. "I knew you would come," she whispered as he held her. "I told the others. I told them my brother would come for us. They didn't believe me, but I knew. I will always come for you," Carter said, his voice cracking. "Always." The moment was interrupted by a rumble that shook the entire ship. Torres looked up from his console with alarm. "Commander, we've got a problem." Graxus is heading this way with his personal guard. 50 warriors, heavily armed. He's going to try to use the prisoners as shields. Carter gently released his sister and stood. His face was calm again. The storm inside him had found its purpose. Torres, those charges you planted on the reactor core, are they still active? Torres nodded slowly. Yes, sir. But if I detonate them here, we'll all. Not here. I'll draw Graxus away. Lead him to the reactor section. When I give the signal, blow the charges. Mitchell grabbed his arm. Daniel, that's suicide. No. That's the mission. He looked at his sister. At the thousands of prisoners depending on them. At his team who had followed him through hell. Get them out. Get all of them out. That's an order. He walked toward the door, alone, to face a warlord and 50 of the deadliest warriors in the sector. Behind him, Megan Carter began to cry. But she also began to hope, because she knew her brother. And she knew that he always found a way. Warlord Graxus found Daniel Carter standing alone in the corridor outside the reactor section. The human was covered in blood. Most of it, not his own. His armor was damaged and his rifle was nearly empty, but he stood like a wall, blocking the path to the cargo bays where the prisoners were being evacuated. One human. Graxus laughed, his 3 rows of teeth gleaming in the emergency lights. One human against my entire guard. You must be either very brave or very stupid. Carter checked his weapon. 12 shots remaining. 50 enemies in front of him. The math was simple. The math was impossible. I've heard those words before, Carter replied calmly. Graxus stepped forward, his personal blade humming with energy. I have crushed 17 worlds, little human. I have broken species that were old before your kind crawled out of the mud. What makes you think you can stop me? I don't need to stop you. I just need to slow you down. Carter opened fire. The next 3 minutes were the longest of his life. He moved through the corridor like water, using every piece of cover, every angle, every trick he had learned in 20 years of warfare. His shots found their marks again and again. Dravine warriors fell around Graxus like trees in a storm, but there were too many of them. And eventually, his rifle clicked empty. Graxus charged forward and knocked the weapon from Carter's hands. The warlord was faster, stronger, bigger in every way that mattered. His blade cut through Carter's armor like paper, leaving a burning wound across his chest. Carter fell back against the wall, blood dripping from his lips. Now you see, Graxus growled. Now you understand. Your kind cannot stand against us. You are nothing but insects, pretending to be predators. Carter looked up at the warlord, and despite everything, he smiled. Hey Graxus, you know what the difference is between your kind and mine? Graxus raised his blade for the killing blow. Tell me, little human. Tell me before you die. We're better at math. Carter pressed the button on his communicator. 3 levels below them, Torres activated the charges he had planted on the reactor core. The explosion was not large enough to destroy the ship, but it was large enough to blow a hole in the hull near the reactor section. Graxus and his guards were caught in the blast, thrown against walls and floors as the artificial gravity flickered. Air began to rush out through the breach, pulling debris and bodies toward the cold void of space. Carter grabbed onto a support beam and held on with every bit of strength he had left. Graxus flew past him, his arms reaching for something to hold onto, his eyes wide with shock and terror. The warlord who had conquered 17 worlds tumbled toward the breach, screaming curses that no one could hear over the roaring wind. And then he was gone, sucked into the vacuum, frozen in the darkness between stars. Carter's grip began to slip. The wound on his chest made every breath a struggle. He had accepted his death the moment he walked into that corridor alone. He had no regrets. His sister was safe. His people were saved. That was enough. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. A hand grabbed his wrist. Carter looked up and saw Mitchell, her face determined. Her feet braced against the floor as emergency doors began to seal the breach. You're not dying today, Commander, she shouted over the dying wind. That's an order. She pulled him to safety just as the doors slammed shut. The two of them lay on the floor, gasping for breath, surrounded by the bodies of fallen enemies. "The prisoners?" Carter managed to ask. "Safe. Katie and Torres got them to the shuttle bay. Sorth's people helped carry the ones who couldn't walk." Mitchell allowed herself a small smile. "We did it, Daniel. We got them all out." The shuttle that carried them away from the crippled flagship was packed beyond capacity. 7,000 humans and 43 Valorians crammed into a space meant for 100. But no one complained. No one pushed or argued. They simply held on to each other and watched through the windows as the Relentless delivered the final blow to the crushing might. Captain Reyes had positioned her ship directly above the flagship's bridge. When she gave the order to fire, every weapon on the Relentless spoke at once. The Dravine vessel cracked open like an egg, spilling fire and debris into the void. It was over. 3 weeks later, the Valorian High Council opened their crystal doors to receive their first human visitors. High Priestess Yalith stood at the center of the chamber, her robes flowing like water, her expression unreadable. Captain Reyes entered first, followed by Commander Carter and his team. Behind them came Elder Sorth and the survivors of Keleth 7, who had asked to speak before the council. "High Priestess," Reyes said, bowing her head slightly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." Yalith studied the humans with ancient eyes. "3 weeks ago, we prayed that you would not come to our sector. We asked the celestial void to protect us from your kind. Tell me, Captain, does this offend you?" Reyes smiled tiredly. It was the smile of someone who had been through too much to care about old fears and older stories. "Not at all, High Priestess. We get that a lot, honestly. But I think there's been a misunderstanding about my people." "Oh? And what would that be?" "We were never coming for you. We were coming for the ones who hurt innocent people. Doesn't matter if those people are human or Valorian or anything else. That's what we do. That's who we are." Elder Sorth stepped forward then, his voice strong and clear. "I have seen the truth of these words with my own eyes. I watched their medic treat our wounded while bleeding from her own injuries. I watched their soldiers share food with strangers they had never met. I watched one man hold a corridor alone so that others could survive." He looked around the council chamber, meeting the eyes of every elder. "The stories we tell about humans are wrong. They are not monsters, they are protectors. They are warriors who fight only for what they love. And if you do not threaten what they love, you have nothing to fear from them." The council was silent. Yalith seemed to be considering something carefully. Finally, she spoke. "Then perhaps our prayers were answered after all. Just not in the way we expected. We asked to be protected from humans. Instead, we were protected by humans. The celestial void works in mysterious ways." In the medical bay of a station orbiting Valora Prime, Megan Carter sat in a recovery bed, surrounded by machines that beeped softly. Her wounds were healing. Her body was growing stronger, but her eyes still carried shadows that would take much longer to fade. Daniel sat beside her, holding her hand. He had not left her side since they escaped the flagship. His own wounds were bandaged and treated, but he had refused to rest. "How did you find me?" Megan asked quietly. "Across all that space, all those star systems, how did you know where to look?" "How did you know where to look?" Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "I followed every lead, searched every system, fought every battle that needed fighting. And I never stopped. Not for a single moment. But why? There were 10,000 prisoners. I was just one person." Daniel looked at his sister, and in his eyes she saw love deeper than words could express. "Your family," he said simply. "We don't leave family behind, ever." Far away, in the crystal halls of Valora Prime, Elder Sorth sat in his quarters and wrote in his personal journal. He was recording his observations for future generations so that they might understand what he had learned. "The humans," he wrote, "are not the monsters of our legends. They are something far more complex. A species capable of terrible violence. Yes, but only in service of what they love. They are not to be feared unless you threaten what they protect." He paused. thinking of Commander Carter standing alone in that corridor, thinking of Sergeant Katie Brooks crawling toward her patient despite her wounds, thinking of Corporal Derek Nash fighting beyond all reason because someone needed him to fight. And if you do threaten what they protect, he continued writing, then pray. Pray to whatever gods you believe in. Pray with all your heart and all your soul, because the humans will come, and your prayers will go ignored.